Hi, this is Janossy. I'm going to show you a demonstration of how you can modify a sound file for creating a ringtone or creating the little lead-ins that I create for many of the videos that I put up on the web. What I'm going to do is to find a sound file that I've already stored out here. It's an interesting little melody, and I'm going to do a right mouse click on it and open with Audacity. If you've installed Audacity, it probably will appear in the same way that it just appeared for me. Let's play this first so you see what we're dealing with. And that's about as much as I'll play at the moment. Let's expand the time scale here, and then I'm going to hit this and go back to the left. So this starts with about a second worth of silence. I'm going to take that off by marking it, and then I could either say edit and cut, or I could have just hit the delete key on my keyboard. Now that means that it will start playing right away. So it starts right off without a delay. What I need to do is to figure out how much of a clip do I want, and do I want to take it at the front? Well, I think I am going to take it at the front. It's just an interesting place to start. Sometimes, however, it's more interesting to take things at the back, and however long you need it, just back off from the end, and then it sort of ends naturally. But I'm just going to try it at the front at this point. First of all, let's see how far into it I want to go. What's a natural break? And I'm looking for 10 to 15 seconds worth of music here. So let's just see what it sounds like. Well, it seems to be about 12 seconds worth of stuff that kind of repeats. So I'm going to guess right here, and let me just isolate this so that I can play it. Okay, let me isolate a larger part of it. Okay, seems like it kind of ends right here in a natural way. Now I'll go over here to Edit, Select, and then Cursor to End. Now, once again, I can do Edit. Let's see here. I've marked it. This way I must do it again. I can mark here, Edit, Select, Cursor to End. Now I am going to hit the delete key. Well, I just ran into a problem and it doesn't work. You may see the same problem. Once you play something, you can't just pause it. You have to actually stop it in order for any other command to work. Now I would be able to get the edit and the cut. So now I have this thing kind of ending. Let me back off about 4 seconds here and finish up to see if I've ended it properly. Well, that's pretty good. Now you might want to, at the end, just sort of take maybe half a second or a second and taper it off. And the effect for that is fade out. Now watch what happens to that waveform. See how it tapers off now? So instead of ending abruptly, it'll sort of fade out. Let's see how that sounds. And that's kind of nice, sort of like a fade between visual scenes too. Let's go to the front end. We might want to do the same thing over here. It starts like this right now. Now that's not too bad. Let me show you what would happen if we actually faded in. Okay, see the reverse now. Now let's see if this is more pleasant or not. Well, it's okay, but it kind of sounds a little weak at the front end. I think I'm going to edit and undo the fade in. It's just going to start right off with a kind of a jump into the music like this. Okay, now let's do this. Let's edit, select all, and then let's use the effect of normalize. This is going to do some cleanups on it and center it around this 0 line, it has a small effect on the way it sounds. Now you see, it standardizes it so the peaks are about halfway to the edge. And if you do this consistently on the recordings that you put out, then the people who are listening won't have to twiddle the volume control so much. So let's play it now. And wherever you use this, some video editor perhaps, if you put this on the beginning, you can always adjust the sound down to make it less volume at that point, or you could adjust this if you're always going to be doing this at the beginning of a video, kind of a standard theme for you, then you might want to reduce the volume here and just have it ready to go, always at a consistent lowered volume. I think I'll just leave it this way for the moment. Let me show you a few other things too, though, that are kind of interesting to do. You see we have 2 tracks here. But we can control that with this little control here. If we wanted to split these tracks up, now notice they're separate. See, there's a dividing line. Now I could handle each one of them separately. I could also mute either one, and when I play it, only the other side will play. Here, the left speaker will play. And if I were to reverse that, the right speaker would play. And actually now, if I unmute this, but if I turn this into mono, what's going to happen is a mixture is made of these 2 tracks, and it doesn't have the stereophonic effect. You may not see that in this little video, but you would if you had stereo speakers. So that's just, there's very little reason that you'd want to do that. On the other hand, if you wanted to actually play with this and combine the sounds a little bit into mono, you might want to reduce the intensity of this a bit, both of the tracks together, so that when you combine them in a different way into a mono sound, you wouldn't have the danger of the amplitude here and the amplitude here adding together and exceeding what the amplitude is that can be handled by the system. If you did that, you'd get a raggedy sound because it would be clipped off at the top. Now, if you wanted to, let's go back here and let's make this back into a stereo track. Let's see if I did that properly. Let's go here and split the tracks once again. See, I left them, oh, it's the left and the right, fine. I had turned it back from mono to a stereo. So let's do stereo here. Now, if you wanted to reduce the intensity all the way across the board, let's once again edit and select all. Let's go over here to Effect and Amplify. Normally, when you click Amplify, it's going to set an amount here that will raise the intensity all across the board so that the highest waveform just misses the edge. It's the maximum intensity without distortion. If you were to click this, it would allow you to make this number even higher so that you would intentionally clip off the tops of some waves and distort the music. However, if you go negative on this, and you'll notice here the numbers have a negative sign in front of them. If you do this, the larger you make the negative number, that is, the smaller you make it, when you do this, it won't amplify, but it will diminish the amplitude of the sound. So if you wanted to do that, that's a way of getting this thing to adjust all across the board. Now, if you wanted only to do that for a segment, for some reason, some little passage here, you could do this, and you could, if you wanted to amplify, you could amplify just that piece. Or if you wanted to, let's undo that. If you wanted to diminish the intensity just in that area, you could do that too. So what you're looking at here is the sound waves themselves. By their visual appearance, you can kind of tell what the music is doing at that point. Last thing here we're going to do, I'm going to save this 2 ways. I'm going to save it, exporting it as a Wav file. Now the reason for that is that a Wav file, although it's large, it doesn't lose any quality of the sound. It's called a lossless recording mechanism. I'm going to change the name slightly so that I'm going to just say this was my demonstration number 1, so I'm not going to clobber any other file there. A WAV file will store fairly quickly. For a short passage like this, it will store almost in the blink of an eye. There isn't much work for the system to do because it's just simply outputting all the values that make up these waveforms. That is, all the values that are being stored to be able to recreate this waveform on demand by signal processing circuitry. So it's not really stored this way. What's stored is the values that are plotted out here for you to make that waveform appear. But now I'm also going to save this as an MP3 file. And MP3 does lose something in the way that it compresses the sound. There's various settings that you can make on MP3s to vary the amount of compression. It's a trade-off. The more you compress it, the worse it sounds. The less you compress it, although even at maximum quality, it's still very much compressed from the WAV file, but the less compression, the less distortion, the more the sound sounds like it did in the WAV file. I have this thing set in a way that for music it's fine, and Audacity will probably come to you in that way. You don't really have any incentive to reduce the size of it for music, but perhaps for speech you can reduce it to mono, and you can actually reduce the amount of quality without losing the intelligibility of the voice. And you might do that if you had a long talk that you were trying to record and you wanted to make it of a reasonable size. You wouldn't want excess quality there. When you save as an MP3, I would go for the more compatible setting here. This has to do with the amount of labeling information that the file stores, and you can give it a title, and I might just call this 12 seconds of lead-in, and the artist I could leave blank, the album, the track number, the year. The genre is useful only for music players that use the genre to group and then select, like the Apple iPod does. It doesn't really matter what I leave this set to because it has no effect on it. It's just a label. I usually put it into speech. Let's see if we can find the speech category for anything that I record in voice. Otherwise, I might just make this other. Now you'll notice these names are not in any particular sequence, and that's because of the values that are used by which they're stored. Rather than fiddle around with this, it's terribly inconvenient without having these in order. I would just leave it with the first one because you're not going to see this for this type of lead-in. The purpose of creating this is creating a music track that you'll include in some video lead-in later on. If you choose to make the identification at the front have some sort of labeling and maybe some music to go along with it, that's kind of distinctive for the productions that you make. When I click OK here, it's going to take slightly longer because a lot of work is being done here to do this compression. It will grind on even for a 12-second passage. You see, it might take 5 or 10 seconds to do it. And obviously for a longer selection of music, it would take a while to create the MP3, of course, depending on the speed of your computer. I don't save in Audacity as a project. The theory is that if you save it as a project, you can always come back and redo your edits and whatever. The problem is it's very voluminous when you save it as a project, and I've had problems. It's kind of a flaky mechanism, really. I wouldn't suggest doing it that way. You're already protected. If you saved it as a WAV, you can read it back in Audacity, and you can continue to work with it. You wouldn't want to read it back in as an MP3 if you had the WAV file available, because then if you did more edits and saved it as MP3 again, you'd be compounding the distortions that occur when the compression occurs. So you'd want to save a WAV copy of the file so that you could work on it later on. But it's going to be much larger than the file that stored as an MP3, which is intended for your sound player or for inclusion in a soundtrack in some video. Now let's do this. I'm going to get out of here. There'll be a message that comes up that says I haven't saved this. Well, that means I haven't saved it as a project. I've certainly saved the files by exporting them. So I'm going to say no. I'm not going to save them that way. Now, I'm still in the folder where I keep these things, and I'm going to do something interesting here. When I look at this with the details this way, as opposed to, for example, looking at thumbnails, which is kind of handy if you have things out here that you want to recognize, that is, visual things that you want to recognize. Unfortunately, what usually happens is this list comes up, which is kind of dumb. And it's particularly dumb if your machine isn't set to show these suffixes like MP3 and WAV, because if you don't see those, you're kind of left to seeing what the little icon says that the file is. It's much better if you go here and turn this into details. Now you get to see the date that the file was created and its size. And if you sort in this column, it will, as you click in this date modified column, it will sort descending or ascending. And this is a very handy way to find within a folder the files you just created, because they will be the most recently timestamped ones. So here you can see what's happening. This MP3, 189 kilobytes, that's less than a megabyte. It's rather compact, but of course it's only a 12-second sound file. Now here we have this WAV file. It's 4.1 megabytes. It's much, much larger. It's maybe, what is that? That would be 20 times larger than the MP3. And that's why we don't usually have WAV files. In fact, many sound players, MP3 players, don't play WAV files. MP3 is a much more standard format. What happens if I click on this? It will open up on my machine in Windows Media Player, and it will just play this back. So let's see. The reason it started again is I happen to have this thing set to repeat. So when the play, this thing says repeat. I'm going to take that off, and that way once it ends, it won't repeat again. So if I were there, and now it stops and it isn't going to go around again, confusing the issue. Now I have this little melody, 12 seconds long, and about the right intensity for me to include on the front of a video where I normally put titles that stay there for just a little bit so that when you start looking at this, you can see what you're looking at. And that will be the subject of other videos coming up as we move into video editing.